just for that, you have to stay and do dishes. There's your dish person, Brandon. All right. Sorry about that. I just wanted to get that before I forget.
Okay.
Please.
All right.
These are not new fellows.
They're old.
Old new fellas.
Old fellas.
Well,
We prefer the term vintage.
okay,
Season.
yeah.
Fine wine.
At any rate, these are the Hobson brothers.
Right.
Dale and Cliff. I know him as Gene. Some people know him as Cliff. What have you. Both of these gentlemen were over in Germany about the time that the liberation started to take place. And Gene, he was in the 45th Infantry Division that came up, and he'll talk about his experience on liberating Dachau, the concentration camp in Munich. Dale, he spent some time over in Belgium, but then he happened to also get an assignment in the nice city of Wiesbaden. And he'll talk about that after Cliff is finished. I set them in here hoping that, you know, they didn't have to raise their voice too much. I was hoping for a mic, but that didn't work
I
out.
think we can get that going real quick.
Huh?
It only takes a second to
We
get
can
the
invent
system
one.
going.
We'll see. And then that young man right over there, Rick, is Gene's son, and he came over here, I guess, to take pictures and also to grace our group. So with that, you're on. However you want to do it.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna stand up for a minute here. I might sit down a little later.
Okay.
Asking an 88-year-old veteran to tell his story is a little dangerous, but I'll try and make it as brief as possible. First of all, I want to make a disclaimer. I'm going to tell you about my wartime experiences, but what I went through as a veteran and through the European campaign was a walk in the park compared to some people like our mutual friend Bob Wilson, remember him? That was a veteran of the Bataan Death March, and people like that, and particularly our fellow veterans that have come along in later, more unpopular wars. The war in the Pacific during the Second World War was ferocious compared to the European theater. The war in Vietnam, our veterans there took a bad rap, came home to all kinds of criticism for things that they had no control over. Other than that, I could just tell you my story. I was born and raised down in Buell, Idaho, to a great family. Went to finished high school there, and about that time, the U.S. was supporting Great Britain in their efforts against the Nazis and so forth. And we could kind of foresee what was going to happen. So I went to work, elected to go to work in the defense industry, and right out of high school, or the next year after I got out of high school, I moved up to Seattle. Excuse me. Went to work for Boeing Aircraft. The girl that I'd been going with in high school moved over to Portland and went to work for Jansen Woolen Mills over there. And so we continued to see each other. I was working first of all in Boeing's, and then I had a chance then to go to work as a lead man because of my experience in metal fabricating in the shipyard. And I think I was making about 80 cents an hour on the night shift at Boeing's. And I went to work in the shipyard for $1.75 on the day shift.
Wow.
And so then I made the best decision of my life. I married Nora, and we had become wealthy because of our big increase in wages. But we continued to live there in Seattle then until they changed my rating as far as my induction to 1A, and I knew that I was scheduled to go in. So I changed my draft board from Seattle down to Buell. I went back to Buell for a couple of months to stay with my dad and mother until I was actually called into the service. And called into the service in August 1944 down in Fort Douglas, Utah, in Salt Lake. And that was quite an experience in itself. We've heard a lot of objections about full scan inspection at the airport. That's nothing compared to what we went to down there. I'll have to tell you one amusing story there.
I've heard it before.
As part of our physical inspection, they made about 20 or 30 of the GI prospects line up in a circle with their back to the inside of the circle. There was a captain on the outside of the circle taking notes, and a lieutenant on the inside of the circle doing the inspection. And there were the GIs, or the potential GIs, were told to bend over, drop their pants, and spread their cheeks. And so the lieutenant went around with a flashlight, doing the inspection, and the captain on the outside was taking the notes. But periodically, just as the lieutenant would get down with his flashlight, the captain would make an obscene noise, and he had that second lieutenant so jittery he could hardly function. But I remember lying awake there the first night in the induction camp, listening to the young fellows that had never been away from home, kind of crying in their sleep. It was quite an experience. Then after that, we went on down to Camp Roberts, California, for our basic training, which was pretty much routine. It was including bivouac, which we were. This bivouac, our finishing bivouac, came along the latter part of December.
Can everybody hear?
Can you hear okay? Came along the latter part of December. I'll stand like this. They called us in early because of the Battle of the Bulge was going on. And well, let's see, I left one thing out. When I was in Fort Douglas, Utah, I presented the officer with a letter that I had from the commandant of the 9th Naval District in Seattle, asking that I be assigned to a Navy repair ship program because of my metalworking experience. Well, the captain looked at the letter and promptly filed it in the round file and said, unfortunately, what we need are people in a rifle company.
Targets.
So anyway, we finished our bivouac, where they called us in early off bivouac in the winter of '94, sent us home for Christmas. We were home for Christmas in
44.
In 44, I'm sorry.
Just subtract it.
And then around the 2nd or 3rd of January of 45, they put us on a plane here at Gowan Field on a C-47 and flew us back to Fort Meade, Maryland. And then from Fort Meade, Maryland, they took us to Boston Harbor, where we got on the Queen Elizabeth for transport overseas. Excuse me. We were on the Queen Elizabeth for, I think 4 days, maybe 5 days, without any escort, because the ship was faster than the escorts, and they took a zigzag course across to try and avoid any U-boats or anything. But we made it safely to Glasgow, Scotland is where we landed. They took us off the boat and put us on the regular train system that went from Glasgow, Scotland, down to Southampton in England, and then on a landing craft and across the channel over to Le Havre, France. This, of course, was in the middle of the winter, and we got to Le Havre, and this was almost like Southwest Airlines. Our baggage hadn't caught up with us. We didn't have our barracks bags. In the middle of the winter, there was about a foot of snow on the ground, and all we had was our field jackets. And they put us in tents to await our baggage and get the transport. So the next day, they moved us out of the camp and up to what's called a repo depot. It's a depot where they take all the replacements, men that are replacing people that have either been injured or killed in the war. And it took us up to the repo depot where we got our assignments. And there I was assigned, fortunately, I was assigned to what's called a heavy weapons company, which is the fourth company in I can't think of the name of the division. We have the regiment, and then it's divided up into, give me the word. What kind? Anyway. You have,
157 is right.
I can't think of the word, but it's composed of 4 companies. Battalion. There's 3 rifle companies and then a heavy weapons company. I was assigned to a heavy weapons company with a water-cooled machine gun, and our job was to provide covering fire with machine guns and heavy mortars over advancing riflemen, so we didn't ever have to be the first ones out, which was a big break for me. And so after we were assigned to our division, we were there up in the mountains in eastern France for a period of maybe a couple of weeks, and then our regiment was went in further into the mountains up to the front and relieved another regiment that was up on what they call defense perimeter. It had actually been there for quite a while, and they had dugouts that they'd dig a hole and then cover it with logs and dirt so that you could crawl into a hole and be comparatively safe. But if you can visualize the setup there, it's kind of interesting. Had a forest covered, this was in beautiful wooded countryside, had a wooded hill that we were on here, fairly steep, and then across a cleared valley. It was probably a half a mile across the valley, and then another wooded hillside where the Germans were dug in a defense perimeter. So about all that was going on was that every night we'd send out recon patrols to see what was going on over with them, and they were sending out patrols to come over into our area to see if they could get information for what they needed. I did have one story to tell there about we were in such deep woods that you really couldn't see very much, except that if you could look up at the sky, the sky was lighter than the trees, and you could see that way. And one night about 2 or 3 in the morning, it was my turn to stand on what we call stand on the gun. We stood in our foxhole and had the machine gun out in front of us, and it was very, very cold, so we would stand there in our sleeping bags and have them I had mine unzipped down to about here, and as a gunner, I carried a 45 caliber pistol, and I just had it kind of cradled in the zipper of my sleeping bag, standing there about 2 o'clock in the morning and kind of looking around. And I suddenly felt a presence, so I turned slightly to my left, and there, silhouetted against the sky, as this German soldier was on patrol. He had no idea that I was there, and I tried to call out, "Halt!" Halt! Anyway, he took off on a dead run down through the trees, and somebody tried to take a shot, but I don't think he ever hit him. But that was my first experience as a combat soldier. And we were there for probably another 2 weeks, and about the only thing that went on were those night patrols. And then occasionally from the rear they would bring up hot food to us. Usually we had what they call either K or C rations, but once in a while these trucks would bring up hot food to us. But every time they did that, the Germans seemed to either smell the eggs or something, because they would throw in a few rounds of artillery, and so that was exciting. So anyway, we're up there for a period of time, and then they took us back, relieved us, and took us back into an area back behind the lines, to a regimental headquarters area, and prepared us for a push into Germany. And we did river crossing practice on a lake there, I remember, and that sort of thing for a period of a couple of weeks. And then we were off to try to get into Germany, and my group didn't have to try and fight our way across the Rhine River. We were held in reserve. 2nd Battalion was held in reserve, and so we got to cross over on a pontoon bridge. And then we joined, after we got across the Rhine River, the 157th was assigned to General Patton's 3rd Army, and it was our job to follow the tanks. And as he would come to these small towns, he would just go the tanks around the towns and secure them, and then it was our job to go into the towns and clear them out from the German soldiers and so forth. We'd isolate them first, and this went on for 2 or 3 weeks. The little towns, I can't remember the names, it was all kind of a blur. But then we came to the town called Aschaffenburg, Germany, and some of you may remember, excuse me, Aschaffenburg, Germany was a training area for Hitler's SS troops, and not only the soldiers that were there, but the civilians seemed to be very radical, and they would not give up the town, and so they were advised that if they didn't, that we were going to have to ring the town with artillery, and that the town would be leveled. But they elected not to surrender. They were a very radical group, and so they did ring the town with artillery, and bombarded the city with heavy artillery until it was practically leveled. But then we had to advance into the town, and there was a couple of times where I did have a couple of close calls that I can tell you about. As we were going into Aschaffenburg, we ended up in an abandoned hospital building, and we set up our machine gun up on the second floor in a kind of in a corner room, looking out over what was left of the city. And if you can visualize it, there's a big open window here in front of us and another open window on the side of us here. We're up on the second floor. And of course, there's no glass in the building. It's been bombed out. But there again, along probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a bunk kind of underneath this window along here, and my buddy, one of my squad members, was sleeping on this bunk, and I was on the machine gun, and a German patrol, unbeknownst to us, came by, and one of them fired a anti-tank bazooka grenade or whatever it was. It was highly explosive. They fired it in this window here, and it went up through the window. And fortunately for us, it had a plastered ceiling in it and a void between the ceiling and the next floor up. So the round, like I say, fortunately for us, went through the ceiling, and it didn't explode until it got above the plastered ceiling. But it did have enough concussion that it picked me up and blew me down the hall about 30 or 40 feet. And the whole ceiling came down on the other guy. But we both got out of it okay. And then the next day, we went on into Schaffenburg. And as we went in down the main streets, we noticed that there were bodies hanging on the lampposts. Several bodies, half a dozen bodies hanging on the lampposts. What had happened is that one of them was a Luftwaffe officer who was in the Air Corps, and he tried to convince the commanding officer there that he didn't really need to stay around, that he might as well get out of town. They executed him and hung him on the lamppost. And there were several other officers that had tried to talk the commanding officer into surrendering because their situation was hopeless. But they wouldn't do it, and the commanding officer had them executed.
Gene, how did they get the bodies up on the lamppost?
I have no idea.
Oh,
They were just hung like they'd been hung there.
With a rope.
They had a rope.
throw a rope over it and
Well, they had the lampposts there have a bar
An arm?
that comes out, an arm that comes out, and they had a rope around that arm and down around their neck, and they were just suspended there. So anyway, from there on, we went down through a series of small towns again. Patton would go around them with his tanks. Then it was up to us to go in and clean out the towns. Then we came to the Danube River, and they were going to build a pontoon bridge to go across it, but it came under heavy enemy fire, under mortars and sniper fire and so forth. And the river was pretty swollen because of the water conditions at the time. So they finally had to give that up, and they elected to have us go across in boats. And the water was pretty swift, so in the middle of the night, of course, raining like everything. And we got in the boats and went across the river okay. We ended up probably a mile down from where we put in. But we got all back together over in a big empty field and with no place to go. And so we spent the night there. I can remember that night. It was very cold and rainy. And we're out there in the open field. And I always, when I found myself in a situation like that, I always got busy with my trenching tool and dug in as good as I could. And I neglected to say that we lost our commanding officer there on the banks of the Danube. He was the type of a guy that would get up and walk around no matter what the conditions were, seeing to his men and seeing what was going on and everything. And he got killed in a mortar attack one day when we were there. So we lost our commanding officer. But then from Aschaffenburg, we went on down to Nuremberg, which is one of Germany's most beautiful cities, but it had been almost completely demolished. And we didn't spend much time in Nuremberg. And then it was on down toward Munich. And we got to a little town about 20 miles from Munich called Dachau. And then we heard that I Company of our regiment, which would be in the 3rd Battalion, a rifle company, would be the one that would go into Dachau to liberate the camp. But for some reason, their heavy weapons company, IJKL, which would be Company L in their battalion, had another assignment. So they came and got 2 machine gun squads from Company H, which was my company. And that's how I happened to be called to go over to the camp. This was, I guess it was about the 29th of April in 45. And so we went on over to the camp, and they were just liberating the camp. The riflemen had been there first, and it was a chaotic scene. The prisoners were wanting to, of course, to get out of the camp, and they were trying to keep them in the camp to kind of get some kind of organization going, get the people that were ill and taken care of first, and so forth. And there were quite a few of the worst of the guards that hadn't made it. They were scattered around. The prisoners had turned on them when they knew that they were going to be liberated. And some of them that were taken prisoner didn't make it back to POW camps because of our own GIs. It doesn't happen often, but the situation was so terrible that some of the guys just lost their cool. And anyway, they estimate that about half of the prison guards were killed during the liberation. But that was about it as far as the camp. I can describe the camp. Dachau was not only a concentration camp, it was
extermination.
Pardon?
Extermination.
Yeah, an extermination. And it wasn't only Jewish people, it was gypsies, it was people that had mental disorders, all kinds of people were in the camp. And people were not only they were taken into what were called, they thought they were showers, they were labeled as showers, but when they got in there, they turned on this lethal gas and killed them. And then they were cremated. So a big part of the camp was a crematorium, and they actually shipped bodies in boxcars from other camps into Dachau to be cremated. And then in addition to that, they had one big area where they had a hospital where they did experiments on prisoners, an experiment how much pain a person could actually stand before they either died or passed out. All kinds of interesting experiments that they did on people. But we did take the people out of the town of Dachau and bring them into the camp and make them go through the camp and actually see what was going on, so that I figured that more people that knew about it wouldn't be lost in history, and we would actually realize what had gone on there. But we got over there, my group got over there, and they found that they weren't going to need us, so we were sent back to our own our group that evening. And then it was on to Munich, and this was, I guess, early in May. Yeah, early in May of 45. We went on down to Munich, and there again they ringed the town, and the rifle companies went in along with us to secure the town. And I had an incident there that was a very close call. It was about lunchtime or about noon, and our commanding officer or our sergeant said, he said, well, let's take a lunch break. We'll go in here and have our rations. So we stopped at this a little house there, and if I can describe the house, it was a very small home, and it had a porch that was kind of enclosed. It had a couple of, up these steps, it had a couple of posts that ran up to the roof on the porch. And then the porch was maybe 10 or 15 feet across to the door of the house. And as I walked up the steps, I was carrying the tripod for the machine gun, and my back was aching and tired, so I just stood on the top step, put my arms over on these posts, or just against them, kind of rest my back. And I noticed that there was a GI trying to get in the door into the house in front of me there, and he had what they call a BAR. It's a Browning automatic that the riflemen carry, and he was trying to get in the house, so he was pounding on the door, and evidently when he pounded on the door the first time, it cocked around into the firing chamber, and he didn't realize it. And just about that moment, my squad leader, Sergeant Susovic, came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder. He says, "Let me through, would you, Hobby?" He called me Hobby. And so I just dropped one arm and kind of swung around sideways like this. He stood up where I had been. About that time, the kid hit the door again with his butt of his BAR, and it fired and shot my sergeant right through the chest and killed him outright. And
It's been through Africa.
yeah, just a coincidence, the way things happen. But anyway,
It was the last day of the war, wasn't it? Next to last day?
that was on the last day of the war, and as it turned out, and the sergeant had been with the outfit clear from Anzio in Africa, all the way up through Sicily and Italy and France and into Germany, and then killed by friendly fire on the last day of the war. But of course, I think of that quite often when I see my grandkids and stuff.
So does Rick.
Yeah, I wouldn't be here.
Anyway, that's pretty much my story. I ended up in Munich. I'm going to call on Dale in just a second here, but after a few days or a week or so in Munich, well, we had a new company commander, and he was straight from the States, and he was all spit and polish, so they had us out doing close order drill over the objections of all the GIs a day after the war ended. Anyway, he wasn't very popular. And then they sent us out on the outskirts of Munich into a little town where we were billeted in people's homes, and we spent 2 or 3 weeks there hunting and fishing. The fishing was fantastic. The only thing is we didn't have very good gear, but those big German brown trout, you'd go along and drift the hook underneath the undercut banks that had been there for 100 years, and you hook onto one of these big German brown trout. So we'd take those home and have the Hausfrau get some of that good German Pilsner and those fish, and had a great time there for a couple of weeks. And then we were sent to our area where they, over in La Harve, where they processed us to Camp Herbert Tarrington, named after cigarettes, which the tobacco people were, by the way, were so nice about furnishing all the troops with cigarettes in our rations.
Even in the K-race.
I think they were thinking ahead. But that's pretty much my story. I came home on a little round bottom boat called a Sea Owl that was rocking both ways, all the way across the Atlantic. And everybody was sick all the way home, but got home and was sent to a PW camp in Roswell, New Mexico for a short time on duty, and then sent to Fort Bliss in El Paso for my discharge. And that was it.
If they hadn't dropped the bomb, though, you'd have been on the way.
We were headed for Japan. I did get, while I was in the camp, waiting to come home, the war ended. We were sent on leave to Paris, and I was in Paris on the day the war ended in Japan, so that was quite a celebration. I was going to have Dale tell you about an incident that happened, or an occasion that happened.
Can I tell 2 or 3?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to, since I am somewhat disabled, I'm going to just sit right here and do my talking, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
But my wartime experiences were a little different than Cliff's. I was lucky enough, like Paul just said, that I got into an outfit that's spit and polish, and they took our company, Company C, and made us, when we got overseas, and made us security guards and honor guards for Omar Nelson Bradley's 12th Army headquarters, which was in Luxembourg 2 or 3 times, in Nabor, Belgium once, up at Bad Wildungen, Germany, and at Wiesbaden. We were always just about 5 miles back of the front lines. I got 5 battle stars and never got shot at, but, which was quite good. But at any rate, while we were in Luxembourg, the Battle of the Bulge occurred. I won't go into detail about us being in the apple orchard and waiting for. We were in reserve for the Battle of Brest, which was over on the very western point of France. But at any rate, they sent the rest of our battalion, headquarters company A and B. We were detached. They attached us to the 30th Infantry, and we got caught in the Battle of the Bulge. I mean, they got caught. We actually lost 42 men in the Battle of the Bulge. And every one of there were 6 fellows from Buell. You probably remember some of the names. Shelley Haldeman, Joe Adam.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. But at any rate, there were 6 of us from Buell in the same outfit, and all of them were wounded except me. And actually, I'm the only one that's still alive out of the 6, which I feel is pretty lucky. But at any rate, we were security guards, like I say, for General Bradley's headquarters, and under Bradley he was second only under Eisenhower. Eisenhower was the top man, and by the way, he was the most friendly general there was. I stood at attention for pretty near every, I was going to say major general, but every general, major general, lieutenant general, full general, all, and even 2 Russian marshals, Marshal Zhukov and Marshal Konyev, and they came to visit General Bradley, and we were not only security guards for them, but we were honor guards, except I never got to, they only took about 20